Long before the current tumult unfolded, Jake Van Dam was a rising star in his family's aeronautical business, admired for his innovative approach and dedication. His family's vast estate, dotted with ancient trees and sprawling gardens, was a place where tradition often overshadowed individuality. Despite these constraints, Jake harbored dreams of carving out his own legacy beyond the shadow of his controlling father and domineering elder brother, Rufus Jr. Jake's professional success was mirrored in his personal life, or so it seemed. He met Brooke at a charity swim event when she cleverly inserted herself into his circle of friends. Jake was drawn to her vivaciousness, mistaking her relentless ambition for charm. Their relationship developed swiftly, culminating in marriage after Brooke revealed her pregnancy. What Jake didn't know was the tangled web of manipulations and secrets that Brooke had already woven. Rufus Jr., Jake's brother, was a polarizing figure. His aggressive personality and unchecked steroid use made him both a formidable rival and a source of scandal. Despite this, Rufus enjoyed the family's favor, often leaving Jake to fend for himself in familial disputes. It wasn't long before Rufus and Brooke's paths crossed more intimately, creating a storm that would upend Jake's life. Jake's marriage, though stable on the surface, was marred by unspoken tensions. Brooke's extravagant lifestyle and manipulative tendencies gradually revealed themselves, especially as her relationship with Rufus deepened. While Jake remained oblivious, focused on his career and his children, Brooke and Rufus schemed behind closed doors. As they gathered on the terrace at the Travelers' Inn, one of the women, wineglass in hand, leaned forward and asked Brooke, "Have you spoken to your ex-husband since the split?" Brooke paused, the question seemingly stirring memories she'd rather leave untouched. "No," Brooke replied, her voice steady but edged with finality. "Since the day I forced him out and handed over the divorce papers alongside a restraining order, there's been no communication. He tried reaching out to the kids, but after I told them the truth about what he did to us, they've kept their distance." Ellie, the newcomer, hesitated. "Was it a messy breakup?" "There's still a lot of hurt," Brooke replied. "When did it happen?" Ellie asked. "A year ago," Brooke answered. "He fought it for a year trying to convince the kids to see him, but they wanted nothing to do with him," Brooke continued. "Eventually, he signed the papers and left. Honestly, he's been gone for 2 years. Good riddance." Brooke's tone was sharp. Ellie then asked, "Why did you end it?" "Because he cheated on me with his first love, Gemma Evans," Brooke said coldly. Suddenly, a voice interrupted from behind. "Jake Van Dam cheated? No way, he's not that complicated. And if I had, I'd remember." Brooke turned, glaring. Well, look who decided to show up. You've got some nerve." Gemma smirked. "Look who's talking. You were already working on Jake while we were still together. Your lies tore us apart and now you're blaming me?" Brooke narrowed her eyes. "When was this?" 2 years ago, as you well know," Gemma replied coolly. "If I had slept with Jake, I'd remember," Brooke snapped. 2 years ago, I was in Edinburgh, 5,000 miles away, studying linguistics. I can prove that. Unlike you. I've been overseas for 3 years, and before that, I taught high school across the country." Brooke's face paled. This wasn't what she expected. "If it wasn't Gemma, then who was he cheating with?" she demanded. "He cheated, and I kicked him out," Gemma said flatly. "And I think your games made sure he couldn't stay here anymore. Even his parents were probably fooled." Brooke's face flushed. "I don't believe for a second he was fooled. He was just following you." Gemma leaned in. "Are those kids even his? I could ask, but I've got other things to do, like talking to Jake's parents." Brooke went pale. "Don't you dare. I'll make you regret it." Gemma smirked. "Life hasn't been kind to you, huh? You use a lot of makeup to cover it up. But I'm off to see your former in-laws and clear up this cheating mess. They'll appreciate the truth. Goodbye." Gemma turned and headed to her car, making her way to the Van Dam house. It looked just as she remembered. 3 parking spots by the gate, 2 giant ginkgo trees, a long shaded driveway, and 3 granite steps leading to the door. She parked, grabbed her laptop, and walked up to the door. Jake's grandfather answered. "Yes, young lady?" he asked. "Good afternoon, Mr. Van Dam. I'm Gemma Evans. Do you remember me?" she asked. "Ah, yes, I remember," he replied. "Your name came up in the mess with Jake's marriage." "Yes, sir," Gemma said. "I'm here to clear something up. Jake couldn't have been involved with me. I was in Edinburgh at the time, and I can prove it." The older man studied her. After a pause, he spoke. "Call me Rufus Sr., he said with a smile. "It's brave of you to come forward. My son and daughter-in-law have their doubts about Jake, but I'm not convinced. He's not the type to cheat." Gemma nodded. "Why are you so sure?" "Because you seem honest," Rufus said. And Jake is my grandson. I know him better than anyone. Gemma hesitated, then said, Jake doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to be the next Mrs. Van Dam. But first I need to find him. Rufus's eyes twinkled. Jake's been keeping his distance. He's not in touch with anyone, but I promise not to reveal where he is. He's at St. Christopher's Crossing, doing well at university. That's our secret, though. Gemma smiled. I've been offered a job at that university, and I've accepted. I'll be seeing him soon. Just then, a voice called from inside. Dad, who's there? Rufus grinned at Gemma. Do you know where the kitchen is? She nodded, but as she turned, she nearly bumped into Jake's mother, Anna, who was furious. You've got some nerve, Anna shouted. You ruined my son's marriage, and now you show up here? Get out! Rufus stepped in. Anna, she's my guest. Let me hear her out. She says she was abroad during the affair. Anna glared at Gemma. I don't believe you. Gemma picked up her laptop and smiled at Rufus. I'll show you the proof. An hour later, Gemma stood before Anna, still upset, and a furious Rufus. So, what now? Anna asked, her voice tight. Gemma decided to be upfront. I'm leaving tomorrow. Jake and I got close fast, but things changed when Brooke came into the picture. She shared how she lost both her friend and potential soulmate to Brooke, but didn't mention her suspicions about the pregnancy. It was Jake's story to tell, if she ever found him. Anna, shocked by the revelation about the woman who was once the mother of her grandchildren, suggested her husband, Jake Jr., meet Gemma, too. Would you like to stay for dinner? I'd also like you to talk to Randall, my husband, about your side. Gemma politely declined. I'm preparing for my new job. She didn't specify where. As she said her goodbyes, Anna turned away for a moment. Gemma, Anna said quietly, if you find Jake, please let us know. We've made some bad choices, and I just want my son back. Gemma nodded softly. If or when I find him, I'll pass on the message. But I can't reveal where he is. Jake disappeared for a reason. He doesn't want to be found. Gemma made her way to her car. Halfway there, she spotted a man approaching. Jake's brother, she thought, eyeing the heavy-set man lumbering toward her. He was broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and a slow, awkward walk. His appearance made it clear he could barely move his arms. Rufus Van Dam, Jake's brother, eyed the slender woman with dark hair, feeling vaguely familiar but unsure where he'd seen her. She could use a bigger chest, he thought, before adding, but those legs, I'd love to feel them wrapped around me. He entered the house and greeted his grandfather. Got a guest? He asked, glancing at Gemma as she headed toward the gate. Rufus answered flatly, Yes, an old friend of Jake's. She's trying to reconnect, but we don't know where he is, do we? That worthless, cheating fool, Rufus Jr. muttered. I want him as far away as possible. He then went upstairs to his apartment built for him after an accident. Meanwhile, Brooke reflected on her life. Jake, 2 years younger than her, had been a part of her life for a while now. Their kids, 16 and 15, were born close together. She first noticed Jake while finishing a 10K swim. Initially, she didn't think much of him, but when a dark-haired girl helped him out of his wetsuit, Brooke's interest grew. Jake's athletic build and striking features caught her eye. She began plotting how to win him over, undeterred by the fact that the girl was probably his girlfriend. It took 6 months for Brooke to break through Jake's shy barriers. Conveniently, his girlfriend moved away, making it easier for Brooke to get close. Soon after, Jake invited her to meet his family at their monthly barbecue. She learned Jake was the youngest of 3, with an older brother and sister. At the barbecue, Brooke noticed the stark differences between Jake and his brother Rufus. Both were about the same height, but Rufus was much heavier and more brash. Rufus took an immediate interest in Brooke, showering her with attention. After 2 weeks, he managed to get her settled into a hotel. A month later, Brooke realized she'd missed her period. Rufus laughed when she asked for advice, telling her, "You should have been on the pill." In time, Brooke's relationships with Rufus and Jake intertwined. After a few months, she married Jake in a small ceremony. Brooke was content. Jake was a reliable provider, and Rufus was her bad boy lover on the side. Jake was good in bed, but Rufus was just for quick, casual sex. Brooke didn't mind that she didn't always peak. The secrecy made it exciting. 13 years later, Rufus's steroid use finally caught up with him. While working out, he collapsed from a heart attack, but was revived by a nearby nurse. Doctors confirmed the cause, a ruptured myocardium from excessive steroid use. After surgery, he was discharged in poor condition, his once prominent muscles replaced by flab. Rufus knew he would need long-term care from then on. Over the next few months, Rufus began manipulating Brooke. He criticized Jake, telling her she deserved better and didn't have to endure financial struggles. Slowly, Brooke became more demanding, asking for a new car and pushing Jake in ways she never had before. One day, during one of her rants, Jake walked away mid-conversation. Brooke shouted after him, but he simply went to his office and started working. A few minutes later, when she entered, Jake told her coldly to leave. It was then that Brooke realized she'd pushed him too far. Jake, usually patient, had finally reached his breaking point. Jake realized he could no longer ignore the damage done. After years of working toward taking over his family's business, his father had pushed him aside to make room for Rufus. Jake suspected his brother was involved, but he didn't care. When his father fired him and tried to force him into a non-compete agreement, Jake laughed and walked out, singing Tommy by The Who. Shortly after, a competitor offered Jake a better job with fewer hours and better benefits. He had already started his own company years earlier, funneling freelance work through an offshore account in Luxembourg, something Brooke had never questioned. Now, Jake made sure all his freelance income went into those accounts. Jake decided it was time to focus on his kids and cut back on work. One morning, as he read the newspaper at the kitchen table, Brooke walked in, demanding to know where he'd been the night before. He calmly responded, "I've been working 15-hour days for a month. I'm done with it. I've reduced my hours to 30 a week. If you want more, get a job." He paused, then added, "The way you've been treating me is unacceptable. If it continues, we'll be getting a divorce." With that, Jake left for breakfast, leaving Brooke stunned. Confused, Brooke called Rufus for help. "Jake's being stubborn. I don't know what to do," she said. Rufus smirked. "I've got a plan B." Later, Jake's secretary informed him that a visitor had arrived. An older woman handed him 2 sealed envelopes saying, "You've been served." As she left, she muttered to the clerk, "Please take care of him." Jake opened the envelopes to find a restraining order preventing him from contacting his wife, children, or parents, as well as an affidavit accusing him of being involved with Gemma Evans. Heartbroken, Jake began dealing with the legal mess. His bank accounts were frozen, and he was forced to rent a small apartment. Back at the house, Brooke overheard Olivia and Brian whispering about a problem. Intervening, Brooke suggested, "Why don't you talk to Uncle Rufus about it?" Olivia responded mockingly, "What advice could that sweaty pervert give?" Brooke was offended on Rufus's behalf, but kept quiet. "What? He's your uncle," she said, trying to stay calm. "Yeah, a great uncle," Olivia shot back. "He offered me money for showing my chest and said he'd reward me for helping with his urges." "That's not what he asked for," her daughter replied, disgusted. Brooke's heart sank. If that's true, Rufus is a dangerous pervert, she thought. That night, uncomfortable truths surfaced, revealing Rufus's twisted nature. Jake had taught the kids to value themselves, keeping them safe. Now, Brooke had a new problem. She'd relied on Jake's child support, but that was ending, and she was about to depend on Rufus for financial support. She began regretting some of her choices. When Gemma met Professor Leonard Daltrey, they exchanged pleasantries, and he shared his role at the university, mentioning he was a widower living with his girlfriend. He recommended St. Christopher's Woods for housing, pointing out a great lot, though it was already taken by a part-time assistant. He also mentioned the assistant was great with children and designing a learning center at the university, but the assistant was very private and hard to reach. Gemma, looking for a place to settle, was joined by Nadia Thompson on a land search. They found a plot for sale in St. Christopher's Woods with a building permit. Nadia suggested a designer for the project, an aeronautical engineer and loner who was designing his own house. Gemma was eager to meet him. Meanwhile, Grandpa Brooke, in a soft voice, asked Brooke, "Do you know where Jake is?" Brooke hesitated. "Why do you ask? Trouble in paradise?" The question hit Brooke hard. Grandpa continued, "Rufus has some unsavory traits. His steroid dependence only makes it worse." Brooke denied knowing what he meant, but Grandpa pressed on. "Those kids of yours don't have Jake's genes." Shocked, Brooke responded, "How dare you?" Grandpa calmly pointed out, "What color are your eyes? Jake's? Your kids?" He noted the kids had brown eyes, unlike Jake's green ones, and that Rufus had brown eyes. "You spent a lot of time in his bed, didn't you?" Brooke was stunned into silence as Grandpa pressed further. "You've let Rufus manipulate you. Now you want Jake back. But I'm not helping you." Devastated, Brooke left, and Grandpa, lost in thought, considered writing a letter. Gemma had grown close to Nadia, but had never visited their home until now. When Nathaniel answered the door, he greeted her with a warm smile, introducing himself as Nathan. Inside, Gemma noticed the scar on his face and wondered about his past. In the kitchen, she complimented their home, asking Nadia how she'd found such a gem. Nadia's expression softened as she paused, lost in thought. It's a long story, but it ends well. I'll share it someday, but I need Nathan's permission first. Not many know the details. Let's just say Nathan took this place from the local bullies and tore them down in the process. She added, Jacob isn't my biological son. He's Nathan's from his first marriage. Was Nathan married before? Gemma asked. No, Nadia replied. He was widowed. But in 6 months, Jacob won't be the only child here, Nadia said with a smile. Gemma hugged her. That's great news, she said, her heart lifting. She almost asked when the baby would arrive, but Nathan interrupted. Gemma, let me introduce you to Jake, Nathan said. Gemma beamed, rushing to hug him. Jake, she exclaimed, but he didn't respond. Jake looked at her flatly. Gemma, it's been a long time, he said, his tone distant. Gemma's excitement drained, and she stepped back, confused. Nadia and Nathan exchanged a glance, and Nathan asked, Do you two know each other? Jake answered, We used to be friends. Gemma's heart sank, and tears welled up in her eyes. This wasn't the reunion she'd hoped for. Jake, why are you acting this way? She asked, trembling. Aren't you happy to see me? I missed you. Jake glanced at Nathan and Nadia, who nodded for him to speak. We'll give you some space, Nathan said, leading Nadia away. In the study, Jake looked at Gemma, clearly upset. You told Brooke we were involved while I was still married to her, he said quietly. You signed an affidavit that ruined my marriage. Why would I be happy to see you? Those lies hurt me more than you know. Gemma felt a wave of anger toward Brooke for using her to destroy Jake's reputation. She straightened up, her voice steady. Listen closely. Before coming here, I spent 3 years in Europe. I never told her anything. I confronted her when I overheard her bragging about it, and I made it clear I wasn't part of her lies. I even went to your parents and talked to your grandfather. He told me you were doing well and I might run into you here. I didn't expect it to be so soon, but I'd already planned to find you. I've missed you. Jake's face flushed with emotion. But what about the affidavit? He asked, still confused. It's fake, Gemma replied firmly. If you still have the original, someone's going to pay for it. Jake stared at her, astonished. Gemma, I loved you, I still do, but I thought you betrayed me, and I spent so much time wondering what I'd done wrong. So, you believe me now? Gemma asked, hope in her voice. Of course, Jake said without hesitation. You've already proven it with a call to my grandfather. You've never lied to me. I believe you. Relief washed over Gemma. One hurdle cleared. Now how would she tell him how she truly felt? Gathering her courage, she asked, So, can we kiss and make up? She slowly pushed her chair back. Jake stood and walked over, pulling her into a hug. Can you forgive me? He asked softly. For what? Gemma replied, offended. You've been manipulated. There's nothing to forgive. Jake leaned in, but Gemma quickly turned, kissing him on the lips instead of the cheek. She pulled him closer, running her tongue over his lips. After the kiss, she smiled brightly. Jake stood frozen, stunned. Did you just kiss me? He asked, almost disbelieving. Yep, Gemma said confidently. I've wanted to do that ever since I found out you weren't married to her. And I've already told Brooke I have a claim on you. Just let me know if I'm moving too fast, but whether slow or fast, I'm coming for you. Jake paused, enjoying the closeness. You know I'm a bit of a wreck, right? That's why I'm building my house so far away. I need time to heal. It's been painful. Gemma gazed up at him. Let me in, she said softly. I'll be here for you. I know you married her because she was pregnant, but honestly, I'm starting to wonder if the baby's really yours. Something's off. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Let's leave that for later, he said, trying to shift the focus. One last thing. Take the job offer from Professor Daltrey. It'll be good for you. As they walked back, Gemma smiled at her friends. Problem solved. He's mine now. Though he's not entirely sure of that yet, she added with a wink. Nadia clapped in approval. That was quick, Nadia grinned. What's next? Gemma wrapped herself around Jake, smiling. I have plans. One involves retribution, another involves never letting that man out of my sight, and I also want to know who to contact about the land we saw today. Dinner was a success, filled with laughter and stories. But as the evening went on, Gemma asked a serious question. Jake, did that woman ever explain how she had a fully developed baby after just 6.5 months of pregnancy? No, Jake said, shaking his head. I was too caught up to question it. Looking back, I realize how foolish that was. What are you suggesting? Nathan, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. She's suggesting the baby may not be yours and that you've been set up. Jake quickly cut him off. But they look like me, both of them. He paused, struggling to express his thoughts, when two women rushed over to him. They embraced him, whispering in his ear. Jake regained his composure, his face hardening. What now? I need to know for sure. Nadia took his hand gently. Can you think of anyone who looks like you? A cousin? Gemma's eyes lit up. It has to be Rufus. Jake shook his head. No, they don't even like each other. Nadia raised an eyebrow. Or maybe that's what they want you to think. Either way, there's only one way to find out, she said firmly. A paternity test. You'll need a top lawyer. I know just the person, Donna Marshall. She's the best. Can you call her for me, Nathan? Jake asked. Meanwhile, Brooke's situation was getting worse. 2 weeks after Jake's grandfather refused to help her, she was still trapped. She needed Rufus for the financial support, but didn't want her children to never see him again. While preparing dinner, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find a man and a woman standing there. Can I help you? She asked. The woman asked, Are you Mrs. Brooke Puckett, ex-wife of Mr. Jacob Randall Van Dam? Yes, Brooke replied, wary. What's going on? The man showed a warrant. We need DNA samples from your children. Failure to comply will result in arrest. Why? What for? Brooke asked, her heart sinking. For a paternity test, the woman replied, leaving Brooke in shock. Brooke had always hoped her children were the key to Jake returning to her. If Jake learned they weren't his, he'd stop paying child support, and her comfortable life would end. At the same time, paramedics and a police officer arrived at the Van Dam house. Rufus Sr. watched from a distance, thinking Gemma had finally found Jake and that Jake was now putting everything together. Rufus Jr. had refused to cooperate with the authorities, even attacking an officer. Soon, Rufus Jr. was led away in a police car, humiliated. 2 weeks later, Gemma burst into Jake's apartment. Jake, the results are in! She dreaded the outcome, knowing it would be difficult for Jake either way. They sat together on the couch while Jake read the test results. When he finished, Gemma noticed he was pale, deeply troubled. Jake? She asked, concerned. Are you okay? You look like you're having a heart attack. I'm not having a heart attack, Jake said, but I might soon if this keeps up. The kids are Rufus's, not mine, both of them. And now he and that cheating ex-wife are going to regret everything they've done to me. Gemma moved closer, wanting to comfort him, but Jake seemed distant. They hugged briefly and exchanged soft kisses on the cheek, but nothing more. Gemma hoped he'd feel the same way. Finally, Jake looked at her, vulnerable. Gemma, don't take this the wrong way. I love you completely, and I've been blaming myself for letting Brooke pull me away when you weren't around. I know you deserve more than I can give right now, but before I can give myself fully to you, I need to fix this situation. I promise I'll take care of it, even if it's the hard way. I don't want you involved in this mess. If you want to walk away, I'll understand. We can part ways without hard feelings. On my side, at least. Gemma felt a wave of relief, like a cool shower after a long day in the sun. She could sense how hard it was for Jake to open up, and she felt the depth of his love in every word. After a moment, she pulled him closer and kissed him gently. The kiss was soft, yet full of passion, and Jake felt an electric shock. He was surprised, not only by the intensity, but also by the fact that Gemma wasn't pulling away, as he had feared. Pulling back just enough for their lips to almost touch, she whispered, Don't be silly, Jake. You're stuck with me now. I'll be here for you through all of this. Jake wrapped his arms around her, kissing the top of her head, thinking, She smells amazing. He then asked, quietly, almost shyly, What if we delay building the house? By the time all this is sorted, I could expand mine and make it work for both of us. Gemma froze. Did he just ask me to move in with him? She couldn't resist asking, Is that an invitation to move in? It is, Jake replied, his voice firm yet tender. I'm committed to you, Gemma. If you want a ring and a ceremony, I'll give it to you. To me, marriage is just a formality, but if that's what you want, I'll do it. I want the ring, she said firmly. A simple, plain gold band. Nothing fancy, just something to show what we have. Jake chuckled. I'll bring the broom once you pay for it. That week, Jake and Gemma visited Donna Marshall. After hearing Jake's desire for revenge, Donna listened patiently before replying, You don't need me for this. You need someone tougher, someone who knows how to move fast. I know someone who can help. I can introduce you. Meanwhile, Brooke was doing chores when she realized she hadn't heard back about the DNA tests. She briefly hoped it might blow over. She had kept her children away from Rufus's influence, and their grandfather had been supportive. But then a loud knock at the door startled her. Hesitantly, she opened it to find Rufus furious and holding a bundle of papers. "What's going on?" he shouted, waving the papers at her. Brooke stepped back, startled. "I don't know, you tell me." Rufus yelled, "That idiot brother of mine wants a fortune for raising my kids, and now he's seized all my property to get it." Brooke sank into a chair, fear creeping in. "Jake's awake, and he's coming for me. Now that he knows the kids aren't his, he'll make me pay. If he goes after me, I'm finished. Edmond Dante would be a kitten compared to him." She felt her luxurious life slipping away. As Rufus Jr. ranted, a second knock came at the door. Brooke tried to ignore it, but the knocking grew louder. Reluctantly, she opened it to find a small man with round glasses and a mustache, accompanied by a woman with a video camera. "Are you Mrs. Brooke Puckett?" he asked. When she confirmed, he handed her an envelope. "You've been served. Have a good day," he said, walking off. Brooke stood frozen, watching the car drive away, her dread building. She opened the envelope slowly, her heart sinking. The DNA tests showed that Jake wasn't the father of either child. Rufus was. The papers also included a demand for reimbursement of all child support payments, with interest, due to the false claims she had made. The amount was staggering. There were also documents accusing Gemma Evans of falsifying an affidavit and defamation. Brooke panicked, but Rufus reassured her that the company would cover the costs now that everything had come to light. After all, she was the mother of his children, wasn't she? That evening, during a family dinner, Rufus Jr. began to explain how he and Brooke had developed feelings for each other and that she was now his girlfriend. "I'll take care of the kids after our lawyers fight off my brother's ridiculous demands." Rufus Sr. intervened calmly. "You need to get yourself a lawyer. The company isn't going to cover the costs of your deception or hers. Jake has already suffered enough because of you." A silence fell over the table. Jake's father spoke up. "Why not? Jake has every right to defend himself against these baseless accusations. The company has top-tier lawyers to handle this slander." Rufus Sr. responded firmly. "The accusations aren't baseless. They're completely true. The children are Rufus's, not Jake's. You and Brooke have been deceiving him from the start. It seems Jake now has DNA proof, and if that's the case, he's right. Moreover, the company has strict rules about fraternization, and you've broken every one of them. If the lawyers take on this case, it won't be to fight Jake, but to enforce company policies that you've been disregarding for as long as Jake's been married to Brooke." Rufus Jr. exploded in anger. "You can't do that! I'm the CEO, not you!" Rufus Sr. chuckled softly. "I own 70% of this company. I'm the chairman of the board. The board can override any decision made by the CEO. So if our legal team is involved, it won't be to fight Jake. It'll be to address the violations you've been making." Rufus Jr. stormed out of the room, kicking his chair aside. Once in the hallway, he froze, trying to catch his breath. Rufus Sr. followed, apologizing for the outburst. As he passed his son, his voice dropped into a deadly whisper. "If I find out anything, I'll bury you so deep even the devil won't be able to find you. Got it?" Stunned by the threat, Rufus Jr. quickly regained his arrogance. "And how do you think you'll pull that off, old man? I have powerful connections too. Try me, and you'll see that I can still fight back." Rufus Sr. gave him a quick, dismissive pat on the back as he walked away. "You better take care of yourself, or you won't be around long enough to see your plans come to fruition." Later, at his apartment, Rufus Sr. sat at his desk, flipping through his Rolodex. He found the number for the University of St. Christopher's Crossing and made the call. The next morning at breakfast, Rufus Sr. was pestered by both his son Randall and Rufus Jr. to let them use the company's legal team. After studying the documents, they realized the lawsuit would be costly, and their best hope was to drag it out until Jake ran out of money. But Rufus Sr. held firm in his decision. "If I find out that you've consulted with any company lawyers, you'll both be out on the street faster than you can blink. This is a misuse of company resources. Got it?" He left the room, making sure to emphasize his point. At his desk, Rufus Sr. called the university again. "Good morning, this is Professor Van Dam. I'd like to speak with Professor Daltrey if he's available. I'd be very grateful." Moments later, a familiar voice answered. "Rufus, old friend, it's been a while. How are you?" Rufus Sr. smiled, though his tone was serious. "Mentally, I'm fine. Physically, not so much, but that's a story for later. I need a favor that involves two people." "Anything for you, my friend," Daltrey replied. "You've always had my back. especially during that scandal with the short guy blackmailing students. What do you need? Rufus Sr. hesitated. I need to borrow 2 of your employees for my company. I have no other option. Which 2? Daltrey asked. Jake Van Dam and Gemma Evans. Daltrey paused. I understand about Jake, but Gemma... She came to see me recently, telling me she'd heard rumors about Jake's marriage and some foul play. She wanted to get in touch with him, especially now that he's divorced. I believe they've already connected. You wouldn't be wrong, Rufus Sr. replied. When can we meet? Let me know when you want me to bring them in, Daltrey said. Can you make it in 2 hours? Rufus Sr. asked. I can be there in half an hour, Daltrey answered. I'll make it happen, Rufus Sr. said. I know you're in a hurry. I am, Daltrey replied simply. See you soon. Later that day, Leon was surprised to see his old friend, who appeared frail and worn, though his voice remained strong and his eyes still held their spark. Before Jake and Gemma could enter his office, the 2 older men shared a tense conversation. In Leon's office, Jake, Gemma, Leon, and Rufus Sr. sat together. The reunion between Jake and his grandfather was bittersweet. There was regret over the lost time, but also happiness in finally being able to embrace each other. No introductions were needed as Rufus Sr. spoke directly. Jake, how would you feel about taking over the company and coming to live with me? He asked. Jake, stunned, replied, But Grandpa, why? What about Dad and Rufus? Rufus Sr. gave a sad smile. I'm ill, Jake, and it's getting worse. I'm at a point where I can't face the pair who are now running the company into the ground. I know you're capable of leading. I've seen you do it before. Jake, shocked, squeezed Gemma's hand. I don't know what to say. Why didn't you tell me? Jake asked, confused. I had my reasons, Rufus Sr. answered. But what about you? Surely Gemma is on board too. I'm building a home here, a family home. For us both, Gemma interrupted, laughing. A family home? Who's talking about taking things slow now? Jake looked at her, confused, before asking, Do you want me to stop the medication? As soon as you can, Gemma replied, then added, I want to have kids with you, if you're ready for that. In a burst of passion, Gemma stood and kissed Jake fiercely in front of the 2 older men. I took my last pill last night. Does that answer your question? She said, her voice full of determination. Rufus Sr. cleared his throat, pulling them back to reality. Jake, Gemma, I need to remind you that you're still part of the company. The office is less than an hour away. Jake looked into Gemma's eyes and she gave a subtle nod, signaling her support for his decision to accept his grandfather's offer. Jake turned to his grandfather. What about my father and brother? Leave that to me, Rufus Sr. replied. Once you're in charge, they won't be able to interfere. I've got my own issues with them. When do you want me to take over? Jake asked. Are you really going to do it? Rufus Sr. asked, a note of relief in his voice. That makes me so happy. Yes, Grandpa, we'll do it, Jake confirmed with resolve. But as I near the end, the pain will only worsen. Leon, who had witnessed his wife's painful end of life, had set up a private clinic for end-of-life care. Rufus Sr. continued, I plan to go there in about 10 days. Jake sat in silence, lost in thought, until Gemma asked, Why all the secrecy? I suspect Randall and Rufus will stop at nothing to maintain their hold on the company, Rufus Sr. said. Jake has already become a thorn in Rufus's side, and I've had to threaten him just to keep him from using company lawyers to fight Jake's lawsuits. Leon added, We've got a plan to protect you both from Randall and Rufus. He turned to his old friend. Should I explain it or do you want to? Rufus Sr. nodded tiredly. You do it. I'm worn out. Leon went on. Once Rufus passes, we'll send a message to trusted managers within the company's offices and factories. They'll lock everything down. I'll create software similar to ransomware to do it. The employees will go home, with full pay, of course. We've made the necessary arrangements. Jake and Gemma were stunned by the scale of the plan. Jake asked, What about us? What's our role in all of this? You'll be informed when the time comes, Leon replied, but you must do nothing until the will is read. That's when everything will be clear. By then, Randall and Rufus won't be a problem. Rufus Sr. sighed, weary. We've already taken care of that. I'll write you a letter explaining everything. For now, it's best you remain in the dark about the details. Grandpa, can I visit you at the clinic? Jake asked, his voice shaky. No, son, Rufus Sr. said, his tone firm. You need to stay away. It won't be easy to see, and I want to face my end alone. This is our final goodbye. Just one more thing. Take care of your mother. She's innocent in all of this, just like you. I promise, Grandpa, Jake said. choking back emotion. "We'll look after her." With that, they said their goodbyes, and Jake, deeply moved, left with Gemma by his side. At Jake's apartment, they sat in silence, processing the painful news. After a while, Jake sighed deeply. "I'm going to miss him. He was like a father to me, more so than my own dad. All my father cared about was Rufus." Gemma, unable to find words, simply hugged and kissed Jake. "I know." 2 weeks later, Jake had just finished negotiating with a contractor to finalize their home in the woods when the sad news arrived. Jake had pushed to finish the house quickly, and Nathan had recommended this contractor, known for his speed and quality. Having decided to stay together, Jake remodeled the house, expanding it significantly. It would now feature 5 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and all the necessary amenities. The house would be heated by geothermal energy, with solar panels and 2 wind turbines providing power. As Jake sat outside, holding the sad news in his hands, Gemma arrived. She tried to comfort him, though she could only do so partially. Jake looked at her and said, "It feels like something was ripped away from me." The following day, Jake received a call from the probate lawyer, summoning him to the reading of his grandfather's will. Jake, along with Gemma, prepared for what was to come when he noticed a black sedan trailing behind them. Without hesitation, he pulled into a mall parking lot. Just as he was about to step out, another black car pulled up alongside them. A woman emerged, signaling for him to roll down his window. Jake did so, keeping the engine running and his foot on the gas until she showed her ID. "We're with the FBI," she said calmly. "We're here to protect you until the case is resolved. When you attend the will reading, act as though we're not here. Everything will be made clear according to Mr. Van Dam's wishes." Inside the office, Jake left Gemma in the waiting room while he entered the conference room, where his father, mother, and Rufus Jr. were already seated. Rufus Jr. smirked. "Look who decided to show up. Here to see if there's anything left for you, huh? Don't worry, I'll make sure you get nothing, you little rat." The lawyer immediately intervened. "Control yourself, Mr. Van Dam, or I'll have you removed. Understood?" Rufus opened his mouth to argue, but the lawyer's voice grew firmer. "I won't repeat myself. If you act out again, you'll be sitting outside waiting for the family to finish," Rufus muttered under his breath, but the lawyer moved forward, unyielding. "I can't hear you. Do you understand? Or do I need to make it clearer that any more disruptions will get you thrown out?" Randall, trying to intervene, froze when the lawyer raised a hand. The man clearly commanded respect. "Good," the lawyer said, his tone shifting. "Now that we've cleared up the theatrics, let's get to the matter at hand." Jake had a sudden thought. The lawyer reminded him of Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, calm and kind, but unrelenting when provoked. It was clear the lawyer was no one to underestimate. His attention snapped back to the proceedings when he heard his name called, and the lawyer began reading aloud. "Everything I own in this office is to go to my only son, Jacob Randall Van Dam, who will now take over as chairman of the board of Van Dam Aeronautical Industries." "What? Only son? But Dad is my father, isn't he? What's going on?" Jake thought, his mind racing. His mother smiled faintly, as though this was no surprise, while Randall and Rufus erupted in fury. "I'm his son! Rufus is my son, too! I'll make sure you pay for this, you thief!" Randall shouted at the lawyer. The lawyer remained unmoved, pressing a button. Moments later, 4 imposing men appeared. They looked like they could overpower anyone with ease, and stood next to the agitated men. One of the men addressed Randall in a low growl. "You really want to push this, old man?" Randall instantly deflated, but Rufus, known for his temper, lunged at Jake, screaming, "I'll eliminate you, you fool!" Before Rufus could act, he was back in his seat, grimacing in pain as he rubbed his injured wrist. Once order was restored, the lawyer continued. "Rufus, my friend, I foresaw this little outburst. That's why I asked these gentlemen to be here." Turning to Randall, he added, "Mr. Van Dam, the DNA results show you are not his son. Your mother's divorce wasn't without cause. Therefore, Rufus Jr. is not your grandson." The lawyer paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle before continuing. "When Mr. Van Dam learned of your treatment of your wife and your misconduct with the company's resources, he proposed to her. She accepted. And now, she's carrying Jacob Randall Van Dam's child." He let that hang in the air before adding, "We also have notarized affidavits and DNA evidence that confirm the second son of Anna Van Dam Hansen and Rufus Van Dam is indeed Jacob Randall Van Dam." Randall was furious, practically vibrating with anger. "You filthy strumpet, you cheated on me. You'll regret this. I'll sell you to a Russian brothel," he yelled at his wife. The lawyer, unfazed, motioned for two men to restrain Randall, who was flailing about in rage. "Let's get this on record," the lawyer said calmly, "and let's make sure these threats are documented." Turning to the four men holding Randall and Rufus in place, the lawyer continued, "I'd like to make it clear that both of you are involved in major financial crimes. We have evidence of embezzlement, with you and your son stealing nearly $6 million from the company. You also funneled sensitive technology to rogue states and foreign competitors." He let the weight of that statement hang in the air before adding, "Several government agencies, including the IRS and FBI, are investigating you. Whether you like it or not, you'll be cooperating with their inquiries." The lawyer glanced at the four men again. "Take them away and hand them over to the authorities." Outside, Brooke watched as Jake walked in with Gemma. She had promised Gemma she would support Jake, but nothing prepared her for what she saw next. Half an hour later, her world crumbled as she saw Rufus and his father being escorted out, their identities checked, and then taken away in separate vehicles. What just happened? Brooke thought, her mind racing. A few moments later, panic set in as she grabbed one of the men escorting Rufus and Randall. "I can't tell you, ma'am," the man said, his tone flat. "All I know is they're going to help with the investigation, and it's going to take a while." Another man added, "They're wanted for fraud, embezzlement, industrial espionage, and illegally transferring classified tech. I don't think we'll see them for the next 20 years. Brooke's stomach dropped. "Who's going to run Van Dam Industries now?" she asked, her voice shaking. "The one who came in with that snitch in his arms," the second man replied, nodding toward Jake. Brooke felt like the world was spinning. She still didn't know exactly what had happened in that office, but Jake had come out victorious. The security and luxurious life that Rufus had promised her were now gone. Depressed, she walked to Rufus's car, found it unlocked, and the key fob sitting on the center console. She drove home in a daze. 1 month later, Brooke was struggling. Her modest income barely covered her basic living expenses, let alone the luxuries she had once enjoyed in her previous life, a life she now called her former one. She knew she had to either find a way to make more money or cut back on her spending. The children's school fees, in particular, were weighing heavily on her mind. Her only option, she thought, was to convince Jake to take the kids back into his care. This would mean getting him away from Gemma, the woman she saw as her rival. During her time with Rufus, Brooke had lived a life of excess, partying, drinking, and, at Rufus's insistence, undergoing extensive plastic surgery. She'd had a tummy tuck to tighten her abdomen after childbirth, a bosom lift, and a facelift. Her lips were plumped, and the result was a far cry from the natural beauty Jake had once been drawn to. Now, she resembled a more artificial version of herself, a far cry from the woman she used to be. She looked like an older version of Cher, without the youthful glow. Despite all this, Brooke believed that she could easily replace Gemma and win Jake back. One morning, she sat in her car, parked where she could see the front door of Jake's house. If Jake came out, she would leave and try again another time. But if it was Gemma, she would wait a few minutes, ensuring the coast was clear, then march up to the door and demand Jake back. Soon, a blue Nissan Rogue appeared and sped around the corner. Brooke checked her makeup one last time, waited 5 minutes, and then made her move. She walked up to the front door of the house, trying to look confident. She knew Jake had been involved in designing and building the house, and she needed to look at it carefully to know what to compliment. Maybe she could convince him to remodel it in a way that would suit him or her. The house itself seemed to rise from the hill, perched at the top with its facade facing north. The small front yard had 2 large windows beside the door, both covered by shutters. Brooke inhaled deeply, adjusted her shirt to accentuate her cleavage, and gave the door knocker a sharp pull. The knock echoed through the house, and she waited and waited. Just as she was about to leave, the door swung open, and Jake appeared. His face was unreadable, but he didn't invite her in. After a moment, Brooke spoke in a sultry tone. "Hi, Jake. You're looking good. Life seems to be treating you well." Jake's response was flat. "Brooke, I had a feeling you'd show up. What do you want?" "I just want to talk," Brooke said. "Aren't you going to invite me in?" Jake sighed. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered, clearly tired of the situation. "Come on in." He led her into his office, which was the closest room to the front door. Jake didn't want her snooping around the rest of the house. He already had a pretty good idea of what she wanted. "Sit down," Jake said, gesturing to a chair. He sat behind the desk. So what is it, Brooke? What do you want from me? Brooke looked around, trying to regain some composure. Aren't you going to show me the rest of the house? She asked. No, Jake replied firmly. Now, let's cut to the chase. Why are you here? Jake, don't you get it? She began, her tone softening. We belong together. We have a history. We have 2 kids together. I need you back. Jake stared at her, his thoughts racing. What's going on with her? Is she completely losing it? He shook his head and replied, We do have a history. But from where I'm standing, that history looks very different from yours. You've got to be out of your mind if you think there's any chance of us getting back together. Brooke didn't flinch. She pressed on. I admit I made mistakes, but I can't take care of the kids by myself. I need your help. They're not even my kids, Jake shot back. I've got proof they're from my half-brother, so why should I help you? Brooke quickly countered. But Jake, you've raised them. You've done a great job with them. Rufus never took care of them properly. Jake let out a long sigh. I'm only doing this because my mom, their grandmother, asked me to. She begged me to take care of them. I'm doing it so you can't get your hands on any of that money. Don't get it twisted. I'm not trying to improve your life. Brooke was stunned. This was not how she had imagined the conversation going. Jake had always been willing to give in to her before, but now she was hitting a wall. She shifted gears, attempting a different approach. Jake, I know I hurt you, but it was all because of Rufus. Now that he's gone, we can help each other. Think about it. I can be so good for you. I know how to please a man in ways that will blow your mind. Dump that cold woman, Gemma, and come back to me. We could be a family again, just the 4 of us. Jake was silent for a moment. Brooke felt a surge of confidence, thinking she had him right where she wanted him. But instead, Jake's response caught her off guard. You're acting like a courtesan, Jake said coldly. You look and act nothing like the woman I once knew. Our past together is one I'd rather forget. I don't want anything to do with you. Not now, not ever. As for the kids, I've made arrangements for them. Olivia will stay at St. Christopher's Crossing, and Brian will live with my mom until he goes to college. You won't be able to provide for him, so I've taken care of that. But don't expect a dime from me. Brooke was stunned into silence. Jake's words hit her like a physical blow. You still owe me, Jake continued, his voice hard. If you try anything, I'll file charges for fraud and extortion. I'll tell the authorities the kids aren't mine and that you cheated me out of money in the divorce. Now get out of here. I'm done. At that moment, they both heard the door creak open. Gemma appeared, poking her head around the corner. Jake glanced at her and said, Come on in. My visitor is about to leave. Gemma entered, a glowing smile on her face. Her pregnancy was evident, and she walked over to Jake, giving him a kiss on the cheek. She whispered something only Jake could hear. I was right. There are 2 of them. Jake's smile widened as he exchanged a look with Gemma. Brooke's mind raced as she finally realized what was happening. You're pregnant, she blurted, her voice filled with shock. Gemma nodded proudly. Yes, I'm pregnant. I'm giving Jake the children he deserves. We're going to have twins. I'm 3 months along. The first ultrasound didn't show both of them, but the latest one confirmed it. It's 2 boys. She kissed Jake again, this time on the lips, and then whispered, Boys. Brooke's world came crashing down as she realized everything had fallen apart. You can't do this to me, Brooke said, almost pleading. You're going to take my children, your niece and nephew. Jake looked at her, his face hardening. I don't know who Olivia and Brian are to me. They're your children, not mine. He paused before adding, and as for Randall and Rufus Jr., I know the truth about them. They're not really related to me. I don't have anything to do with them anymore. Since their arrest, I haven't heard from them, and I'm not going to let you drag me into your mess anymore. Brooke felt the weight of her failure as Jake continued. You have no real support left, he said. Anna wanted nothing to do with you, and now you're completely isolated. You can't even get a job. So I've arranged something for you. I found you a job. Simple, physical work that will pay the rent and basic living expenses. It's the only option left for you. Brooke was speechless. She'd applied for jobs, but had been rejected every time. Now she was stuck, far from the children she loved. Jake handed her a card with an address and phone number. Gemma added, This is your last chance to stay in touch with your kids. But if you don't take it, we'll wash our hands of you. Olivia will stay at St. Christopher's Crossing and Brian will live with Anna. They know what you did to the man they thought was their father. Gemma gestured for Brooke to leave. As she did, Gemma turned and said, In the end, I won. I have Jake and I'm going to have his kids. You bet on the wrong man. I have the best man and you have nothing. Gemma glared at Brooke. If you try anything with Jake, I will stop you. I'll protect him and make sure you never hurt him again. Do you understand? Brooke stood frozen, unable to respond. Yes, I understand, she whispered. Good. No direct contact with Jake, Gemma warned. Only through you. Now get out. As Brooke walked away, her entire world had crumbled. What she had once believed to be her future was now gone. Inside, Gemma was curled up in Jake's lap. She sighed, content. I've waited almost 20 years for this. We're finally together, and it's all thanks to Brooke's foolishness. She stood, pulling Jake with her. Time to practice, she said with a grin. Practice for what? Jake asked, confused. For number 3, of course, she said, laughing, pulling him into the bedroom.